Welcome to Auntie's Sermons, the podcast. I'm your auntie and host, Crystal J. I write and perform every sermon you hear on this podcast. I also do the research, the editing, and at least for now, I'm the sound engineer too. I was a Christian for more than 50 years, and during that time I lived with a contradiction that I couldn't quite reconcile. I was taught that God loved everyone equally, while also being taught that women were worth less than men, that little girls were worth less than little boys, that women were supposed to be subordinate to men simply because they were women. After I deconstructed, I started taking a closer look at the Bible itself. And the more I looked, the more I realized something. I had spent decades studying scripture, and that's when I realized that the Bible was never written to women. It was written to men. And that made me think somebody should be telling the stories of the women too. Not just the stories the men thought were important. All of them, named and unnamed, remembered and forgotten. So I began a project to write a sermon for every woman in the Bible, and that's where Auntie Sermons began. So grab your Bible, grab a notebook and a pen. Soon there will be a workbook available for paid subscribers on TikTok, YouTube, and Discord, and available for purchase everywhere else. And now let's begin today's story about one of the many remarkable women hidden in the pages of the scripture. Sometimes a woman falls in love with a man, and in loving him, she sees things his family has normalized. The favoritism, the manipulation, the wounds everybody pretends aren't there. And because she loves him, because she stands up for him, because she refuses to play nice with the people who hurt him, suddenly she becomes the problem. She's difficult, she's bitter, she's too much. In this episode, we meet two women the text wants you to distrust from the moment they arrive, not because of what they did, but because of where they came from, outside the covenant, outside the chosen line, outside the family story. But what if the text got it wrong? Or at least, what if the people telling it did? What if these weren't bitter women after all? What if they were just two ride or die women who loved their husband enough to call bullshit when they saw it? Auntie Sermons, episode 15, Judith and Basemath, Ride or Die. Genesis 26:34 through 35. When Esau was 40 years old, he took as wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. They grieved Isaac's and Rebekah's spirits. Now, if you've been with me through these sermons, you already know what the text is doing here. We're given just enough information to place these women. Not who they are, but where they come from. Judith, or Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite. Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite. Now, we don't get stories about Beeri or Elon. They don't show up with backstories or speeches or actions. But their names still matter because they locate these women inside a world. They are Hittites, which means they are part of the peoples already living in the land of Canaan long before Israel ever becomes a nation. And in the biblical imagination, the Hittites are not just neighbors. They are part of the surrounding cultures that worshiped different gods, following different customs, and living outside the covenant that Abraham's family believes they are carrying forward. So when the text says Hittite, it's doing more than describing geography. It's signaling difference. Cultural difference, religious difference, family difference. And if you've been following this story, you already know this family has been very intentional about that. Abraham did not want a wife for Isaac from the women of this land. He sent his servant away to find Rebekah from his own extended kin. So when Esau marries women who are explicitly named as Hittite, this isn't just who they are. This is where they stand in relation to the family. not inside the line that has been carefully maintained, but connected to the land the family is living in. The text places them carefully. Their names, Hebrew meanings. Judith, Yehudit, meaning praised woman, whose root word is tied to praise, thanksgiving, and acknowledgement. Now, this name deserves a little more attention because it is closely related to the name Judah, Yehuda. Same root, same sound, same linguistic family. So how do we make sense of that? There are two main ways this gets understood. The first is the simplest. This root, pronounced yada, already exists as a word. It means praise. It means to praise, to give thanks, to acknowledge. So, Yehudit can simply be a name built from that root, just like many names in the ancient world are built from the common words. In that sense, her name does not depend on the person Yuda at all. It just shares the same linguistic origin. The second possibility looks at the text differently because the story we are reading is set before Yuda is born. And yet here is a name that sounds like it belongs to a later identity. So some scholars suggest that this reflects the time the text was written or edited, that the writers already lived in a world where Judah meant something, a people, a region, an identity. And so names like Yehudit would feel natural to them, even if within the timeline of the story itself that identity has not appeared yet. In other words, the story is set in one time, but the language reflects another. Biblical scholars often point out that Genesis preserves layers of tradition, different memories, different tellings brought together into one narrative. And sometimes those layers show through in small details like names, where the world of the storyteller quietly overlaps with the world of the story. Either way, Judith's name carries the language of praise. A name shaped by gratitude, a name shaped by acknowledgement, a name that sounds like something spoken out loud and meant to be heard. Basemath, Basemath, meaning fragrance, perfume, from a root connected to spices, sweetness, and scent. This is the language of presence you don't have to see, the kind that fills a room before you even notice it. Cinnamon, myrrh, incense, something warm, something lingering, something that stays. There are names that carry beauty, Judith or Judith, something spoken, lifted, praised. Basemath, something felt, sensed, breathed in. One you hear, one you experience. We meet them this way, through names that carry meaning, through names that carry presence, through names that invoke pleasant ideas. Rabbinic teaching. Now, when later interpreters came to this passage, they noticed something. The names don't line up because later in Genesis 36, Esau's wives are listed again. Genesis 36, 2 and 3. Esau took his wives from the daughter of Canaan, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebaioth. So now listen to that again in your head. Earlier we had Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and now we have Adah, daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah, daughter of Anah the Hivite, Basemath, daughter of Ishmael. The names are different. Fathers are different. It doesn't read like a clean continuation. It reads like something shifted. So the question becomes, what do we do with that? And this is where rabbinic interpretation steps in. Some of the earliest Jewish interpreters don't jump straight to one clean answer. They wrestle with it. For example, in Genesis Rabbah, Esau's marriages are already treated as complicated and layered, not as a simple list you can line up neatly. Nachmanides Rabban points out that the names and identities don't match cleanly and suggests that different traditions may be sitting side by side in the text. Ibn Ezra is even more comfortable admitting that what we are looking at may be different records preserved together. So before anyone tries to smooth it out, there's already an awareness. Something here doesn't line up, and not everyone rushes to fix it. Some voices within the tradition simply acknowledge the complexity. They sit with it. They let the text be layered, which means that when we get to later interpretations that try to make everything fit perfectly, that's not the only way this has been read. Even within rabbinic tradition, there was room to notice the tension and to let it stand. Rashi, a deep dive to call it what it is. And then Rashi comes in and tries to make sense of the mess. His solution is simple on the surface. These are not different women. They are the same women. Their names just changed. But he doesn't stop there. He has to explain why the names changed. And this is where things shift because now the names themselves become lessons. Basemath, a name that carries fragrance, spice, something warm and beautiful, suddenly gets pulled into a chain of meaning. In the ancient world, fragrance wasn't just about smelling good, it was tied to ritual. Incense, spices, burning perfumes, these were used in worship. You see it throughout the Bible. Incense is offered in temples. Fragrant smoke rises as part of religious practice. It marks sacred spaces. But, and this is the important part, it wasn't just used in Israel's worship. It was used in everybody's worship. Other cultures, other peoples, other gods. So in the biblical mindset, especially later interpretation, incense becomes a signal, not just of worship, but of the wrong kind of worship, idolatry. So what Rashi does is take that step. Fragrance, incense, ritual, foreign worship, idolatry. And suddenly her name is no longer just a name, it becomes evidence. Evidence of behavior, evidence of character, evidence of what kind of woman she must have been. And here's the problem. That is not coming from the text. The text does not say their names changed. The text does not say their names reflect moral failure. The text does not turn their names into accusations. Rashi does that. He takes something that is neutral, even beautiful, and bends it until it serves a lesson. And in doing so, he doesn't just solve a contradiction, he changes the woman. Because for his solution to work, the names can't just be names anymore. They have to mean something about them. And when you look at how names changed in the Bible, they are not handled like this. When Abram becomes Abraham, the text tells you. When Sarai becomes Sarah, the text tells you. When Jacob becomes Israel, the text tells you. And those changes come from God. They mark identity. They mark transformation. They mark covenant. They are not used to quietly imply moral failure. So for Rashi to say these women's names change because of their behavior, that's not him reading the text. That's him building something the text never actually gives him. Because instead of letting the text be messy, he takes these women, their names, their identities, and reshapes them into a lesson. And in order to do that, he has to change them. My story. When one woman really does have three names. Now, to be fair for Rashi for just a minute, I do understand the instinct. Because sometimes one woman really can have more than one name. And I know that because it happened to me. Many years ago, over 30 years ago, I met my husband's family for the first time at Thanksgiving. And it was exactly what you would picture. A house full of people, football on the TV, food cooking in the kitchen, something in the crock pot, something in the oven, the whole house smelling warm and delicious, people laughing, people talking, people moving in and out of rooms. And there I was, nervous as hell, full of social anxiety, meeting my boyfriend's family for the very first time. We had only been dating about a month. I was going through a divorce. I wasn't even sure how I felt about dating yet. So meeting the family, that was a really big deal. At one point, I needed something, a glass of water, a drink, something. And Doug, my boyfriend at the time, said, just go ask Tony. She's in the kitchen. So I did. I went into the kitchen and I met my future sister-in-law, Tony. She got me what I needed. And a little while later, I get sent back into the kitchen again. But this time they say, go ask Margot. And I'm thinking, I have no idea who Margot is. I haven't met Margot today. So I go into the kitchen and standing there is Tony. So I turn around and I go back to Doug and I say, I don't see anybody in the kitchen but Tony. Where is Margot? And Doug starts laughing. He says, oh, I am sorry, sweetheart. Tony is Margot. Apparently, Tony was a nickname she picked in high school. She and her friends wanted names that sounded masculine but could still be feminine. So she chose Tony with an I. But her name was Margot. So I said, okay. I went back into the kitchen, got what I needed, and kept going. Hours later, I get sent on another mission, only this time they tell me, go get that from Elaine. Now I'm fully confused because I've been here all day and I have not met anyone named Elaine. I don't know who the hell they're talking about. So I turn to Doug again and I say, I don't know who Elaine is. And he just loses it because he finally realizes what he has done to me all day long. And he says, honey, Elaine is Tony. Elaine is Margot. Her real name is Elaine. She goes by her middle name, Margot. And in high school, she picked up the nickname Tony. And when this family said Tony and Margot and Elaine, they were talking about the same woman. And that is how I met my sister-in-law. Now, here's why that story matters, because this is the kind of thing Rashi wants us to imagine. One woman, multiple names, different people calling her different things. And to be honest, that part is not crazy. That actually happens. But here's the problem. In my story, the confusion got cleared up. Somebody explained it. Somebody connected the dots. There was a real person in a real kitchen with real people who knew exactly who she was. And nobody took her names and turned them into a moral lesson. Nobody said, well, this name means this, so she must be this kind of person. They were just names, different names, same woman. That's the difference. If Genesis wanted us to know these were the same women, it could have told us. It could have connected the dots. It could have done what Doug had finally did and said, honey, they're the same person. But it doesn't. Instead, later interpretations have to come in and do that work for the text. And in Rashi's case, he doesn't just explain the names, he starts assigning meaning to them. He starts turning them into evidence. And that's where I stop buying what he's selling, because I know the difference between a family using 3 names for one woman and someone showing up later trying to make a messy story behave. So here's the problem. The Bible does do name changes. But when it does, it means something. And it makes damn sure you know it means something. In Genesis 17, Abram becomes Abraham. And God says why. I have made you the father of many nations. That's not casual. That's identity. That's destiny. That's a whole shift in who this man is supposed to be in the story. Same chapter. Sarai becomes Sarah. And again, God says why. There's purpose in it. There's intention in it. There's weight behind it. And then Jacob, Genesis 32, he wrestles all night. He struggles. He refuses to let go. And out of that moment, he is renamed Israel. And the text tells you exactly why. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. That name is earned. That name is fought for. That name is tied to an experience that changes him. So when God changes a name in the Bible, it is not random. It is not subtle. It is not hidden. It is loud. It is intentional. It is meaningful. It marks something real. Now look at what Rashi is doing. He is asking you to believe that these women's names changed quietly, no moment, no explanation, no voice from God, no turning point in the story, just different names showing up. And somehow we're supposed to treat that the same way. No, that is not the same thing, because when God changes a name, it's about transformation. When Rashi changes a name, it's about explanation. And more than that, it's about judgment, because he doesn't just say, oh, they have different names. He says their names reflect who they are. He takes Judith, a name rooted in praise, gratitude, acknowledgement, a name that should be lifted up, spoken with honor, something beautiful in the mouth. And then Basemath, fragrance, perfume, spice, cinnamon in the air, myrrh, incense, the kind of scent that hits you and suddenly you remember something. a kitchen, a holiday, a moment you didn't even realize you were holding on to until it came back. These are not empty names. These are not neutral. These are names that carry feeling, names that carry memory, names that carry something soft and human and lived in. And he takes that and he twists it. He takes praise and turns it into suspicion. He takes fragrance and turns it into accusation. He takes something that should have made you lean in and makes it something you're supposed to side-eye. That's the move. Not just explaining, not just interpreting, but reshaping. Taking something beautiful and making it carry something ugly. And that's not coming from the text. That's coming from him. And let's just say it plainly. Who is he to do that? Who is he to take a woman he has never met from a story that was written centuries before him and decide what kind of woman they must have been to take their names and turn them into accusations? Because you don't see this same energy applied across the board. You don't see men's names getting twisted like this to prove some hidden moral failure. But here, with these women, their names get reworked, reinterpreted, repackaged until they fit the lesson he wants to teach, and that's the difference. God renames people to reveal something about them. Rashi renames these women to say something about them, and those are not the same thing, not even close. Other rabbinic traditional responses, and not all the rabbis agree with him. There isn't one clean, unified answer here. Some interpreters say these are different women. The Esau had multiple wives, and what we are seeing are different lists preserving different parts of the story. Others suggest there were simply more wives than any one passage records. That each section is giving you a partial view, not the whole picture. And then you have voices like Nachmanides, who openly acknowledges that the names and identities don't line up cleanly. He doesn't rush to flatten it. He points out the tension. He lets it sit there. And Ibn Ezra does something similar. He's willing to say in his own way that what we're looking at may be different traditions preserved together. Not a mistake to be erased, but a reality to be recognized. And that matters because it means that even with tradition, not everyone felt the need to fix this. Not everyone felt the need to force it into one clean answer. Some of them looked at the text and said, yeah, this is complicated. And I was talking to Justin, Deconstruction Zone, about this. And the way he put it was so simple. He said, you're looking at stories that have been stitched together. Different sources, different traditions, and at some point, someone stitched them together into one narrative. And when you stitch things together, sometimes the seams show. Sometimes the names don't line up. Sometimes the family connections don't line up because they weren't originally written as one single seamless story. They were stitched. And he pointed out another place where you can actually see the stitching, the story of Jacob and Esau, because in one version of the story, they reunite. They meet south of the Jabbok River on the east side of the Jordan. There's this emotional moment. They reconcile. They separate. Esau goes back to Edom, where he was already living. Jacob goes his own way. That story is complete. It flows. It makes sense. But then you get to Genesis 36 and suddenly the story feels like it jumped tracks. Because now it says that Jacob and Esau were dwelling together in the land and that they had to separate because they had too many possessions, which should sound familiar because that's Abraham and Lot. Too many possessions, not enough land. So they split. But here's the problem. That doesn't line up with what we already read. They had already separated. Esau was already in Edom. Jacob was already somewhere else. So why are they suddenly back together again? That's the scene. That's where you can see it. Two versions of the story, two traditions stitched together. And the stitching doesn't quite line up. So instead of one clean thread, you get overlap, you get repetition. You get moments that don't sit perfectly on top of each other. And that's not something you have to hide. That's something you can actually see. And now the whole situation with Esau's wives stops being confusing in the same way. Because now you're not trying to force it into one perfect list. You're recognizing what you're looking at. Different traditions stitched together with seams still showing. Christian and extra biblical teaching. Christian interpreters often try to do the same thing, harmonize, make it fit. Say, these must be the same women with different names. You'll see this in traditional commentaries. For example, the Jameson Fawcett Brown commentary, a classic Christian source, treats the differences as something that can be explained by assuming alternate names. Different names, same women. Problem solved. And just like Rashi, the goal is the same. Make it one clean story. Make it make sense. No contradictions, no loose ends. But not all Christian scholars go that direction, especially more modern and critical scholars. They look at the same passages and they say, no, this isn't one clean list. These are different traditions, preserved side by side, and they don't line up cleanly. And this is exactly what Justin Deconstruction Zone was getting at when he brought up the documentary hypothesis. The idea that Genesis isn't one single voice, but multiple sources, multiple traditions that were eventually stitched together. And when that happens, you get what scholars call doublets. Two versions of a story, sometimes repeating, sometimes not lining up perfectly, but both preserved, not erased, not fixed, just sitting there together. You'll see this reflected in modern study Bibles like the New Oxford Annotated Bible, where the notes openly acknowledge that different traditions have been combined. And scholars like Richard Elliott Friedman point to passages like this as exactly what you would expect if multiple sources were brought together into one text. So even in Christian and academic spaces, you see the same split. Some try to harmonize it. Some say, no, this is layered. And once you understand what Justin was pointing to, you start to see it, not just here, but all over the text. The contradiction. So what we have is this: a stable story. Esau had wives, but unstable details. Names shift, fathers shift. The story stays, the identities move, and at some point we have to be honest about what that is, because you can explain it. You can say it's different traditions. You can say it was stitched together. You can say it's a doublet. You can say it's transmission over time. You can say a lot of things, but no matter which explanation you land on, you are still explaining something. And what you're explaining is a contradiction. The details don't line up. They just don't. And calling it something else doesn't change that. It just explains why it happened. Christians will sometimes say, well, it's a scribal issue. Okay, but that doesn't actually solve the problem. Because if this text is being presented as divinely inspired, then the expectation is consistency, not perfection in storytelling, but consistency in the details. And what we have here is a story that holds together, but details that don't. And that's all we are pointing out. Not trying to tear it down, not trying to mock it, just being honest about what's on the page. The crux, the bitter line. So at this point, we see the contradiction. We see that the names do not line up. We see that the fathers do not line up. We see that something in this text has been stitched, preserved, merged, or carried forward in more than one way. We've talked about that. We've acknowledged it, and that matters. But that is not where I want to stay today. Because if we stay there too long, the women disappear again. And I do not want to lose them inside the contradiction. I want to come back to the women. I want to come back to this version of the story. I want to stay with the names we were given here and let these women stand in this text for a minute like they existed, like they were real people, like they were more than a problem somebody wrote down in one sentence. So with all of that in mind, I want to take you to one very specific part of this story, one very specific line, one very specific way the text wants you to feel about these women. They made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. And notice what just happened. We weren't told what they did. We weren't shown a moment. We weren't given a conversation. We weren't walked through a single scene. We were given a conclusion, a judgment, a feeling before we ever got a story. And that matters. Because when a text gives you the feeling first, it's telling you how to read everything that comes after. It's setting the tone. It's shaping your reaction. It's deciding for you before you've even had a chance to decide for yourself. And ask yourself this: Bitter? How? What did they do? What happened? What was said? What was the conflict? We don't know. We're not told. And that's the tension, because the text is not interested in showing you the moment. It's interested in giving you the label, and that label is doing a lot of work because these women are Hittites. They are outsiders to this family. They are not part of the covenant line. They are connected to Esau, who, in this narrative, is already positioned as the one who steps outside the expectations of the family. So before you even get to know them, you're told how to feel about them. Before you hear their voice, you're given the reputation. Before you see their actions, you're handed the conclusion. They made life bitter. And now everything about them is filtered through that. That's the move. That's what the text is doing. Midrash about Isaac. So the question becomes, is there any reason these women would have been bitter? Is there anything in this family that might explain that tension? Because if we're going to sit with that label, if we're going to let it hang there, then we also have to ask where it's coming from. And to answer that, we have to look deeper into the story, not just at the women, but at the house they married into, at Esau's family, at Isaac, at Rebekah. Because once you start looking there, things get a lot more complicated. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There is Midrash, and there are later teachings that suggest Isaac was not nearly as fooled as the plain reading makes him seem, that he knew more than the story lets on, that he may have understood exactly what was happening in his own house. And honestly, that makes sense to a lot of people, because this is a man who has lived with animals his whole life. He knows goat skin. He knows texture. He knows smell. He knows the difference between a man's body and an animal hide. And yet the story wants us to believe that Jacob put some skins on his arms and suddenly Isaac has no idea what's going on. A lot of readers have said, come on now, that doesn't pass the smell test. And it's not just the skin. Isaac hears the voice. He says to himself, the voice is Jacob's voice. So now we have voice saying one thing, hands saying another. And somehow we're supposed to believe Isaac just shrugs and gives away the blessing blind. That's why some traditions start pulling on that thread. They ask whether Isaac knew, whether he suspected, whether he was choosing not to step in, whether he was choosing not to stop it, whether he was playing his own role in a family drama that had already been building for years. And if that's true, then the story changes, because then this is not a story about one old man being tricked. This becomes a story about a whole family system that runs on silence, on favoritism, on manipulation, on everybody knowing more than they are saying. Rebekah knows. Jacob knows. And in this reading, Isaac knows too, which means Esau is not just dealing with one bad moment. He is living inside a family where things are being decided around him, about him, without him. A family where the blessing is not simply lost, it is managed, moved. Frankly, it is stolen. And if you marry into a family like that, if you are standing next to the son who got played, if you are watching this happen to your husband, then suddenly that line about bitterness starts sounding very different. Because now maybe the question is not what was wrong with these women. Maybe the question is, what kind of family did they marry into? And what did they see there that the text never bothers to spell out? My midrash. So now I want to ask a different question. What does it take to be labeled bitter in a family like that? Because we are never told what these women did, only who had a problem with them. And if you know this story, Isaac and Rebekah are not exactly neutral narrators. So here's what I see. Here's what I think the text is not being honest about. I think the writers want you to hate these women because they are Hittite, because they are tied to Esau, because Esau is being shaped into an antagonist of the story. These are outsiders. These are not our people. So before you ever get to know them, the narrative decides how you're supposed to feel. They made life bitter. Done. Case closed. Move on. But I'm not moving on, because what I see is something I have seen over and over and over again in real life. These two women are fucking amazing. These two women are ride or die for their husband. They see a man, Esau, who after everything that was done to him, still ran to his brother, still embraced him, still wept on his neck, still loved him after the deception, after the manipulation, after the blessing was taken from him. And these women see that. They see his heart. They see his loyalty. They see the way he still shows up for family that did him dirty. And they are not having it. They are not going to play along with that system. They are not going to smile and nod and pretend everything is fine. They are not going to sit quietly while their husband gets treated like the expendable one. So yeah, maybe they were bitter. Maybe they spoke up. Maybe they pushed back. Maybe they didn't play nice. Maybe they saw right through Isaac and Rebekah's bullshit and refused to go along with it. Because let's be so for real. If you marry into a family like that and you love your husband, you're going to have something to say. And I bet every woman listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. You've been called difficult. You've been called too much. You've been called loud. You've been called emotional. You've been called a problem, especially if you've deconstructed, especially if you've started asking questions, especially if you've stopped playing along. Because the moment you stop accepting the role they gave you, they label you. They don't ask what happened. They don't ask what you saw. They don't ask what pushed you there. They say, she's bitter. And that's what I see here. I see two women who saw what was taken from their husband, who refused to pretend it was okay, who refused to bow down to a family system that had already decided who Esau was supposed to be. And because they didn't accept it, because they didn't stay quiet, because they didn't play their part, they got labeled. Not because we know what they did, but because we know who was telling the story, the reframe. So, are you seeing it now? Does that make sense? They weren't the problem. They were loyal. They were protective. They walked into that family and saw exactly what was happening. They saw the favoritism. They saw the manipulation. They saw the way one son was lifted up and the other one was managed. They saw their husband not as the one who messed up the story, but as the one who got the short end of it. And they chose a side, not the system, not the narrative, their husband. And that matters because that kind of loyalty, that kind of clarity, that kind of refusal to play along, that doesn't make you easy. That makes you a problem. At least to the people who benefit from you staying quiet. Because sometimes the story doesn't tell you what someone did. It just tells you how they were described. And I don't know about you, but I've learned to be a little careful. When the only thing we know about a woman is what someone else called her, so let's come back to them. Let's say their names again. Judith, Basemath, praise, fragrance. If they could call out from the pages of this text, I don't think they would say they were bitter. I think they would say, we saw what was happening. We loved our husband. We stood up for our family. We didn't play their games. We didn't stay quiet. We didn't bow down. And for that, you labeled us. You made us a moral lesson. You took what was once fragrant, what was once praiseworthy, and you turned it into something foul. But the truth is, you can try to spin the story. You can try to control how we are remembered, but we were never the problem. We were just two ride or die women. And the scent of a love like that is praiseworthy. And that's today's anti-sermon. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like, comment, rate, or review the podcast. It really helps more people find the show. And if you'd like to support the podcast financially, check out my link tree in the show notes. There are several ways you can support the show and the work that I do. You can also find me on TikTok and YouTube. I am Crystal J, Crystaljae. And remember, I'm Nice Lady.